A real estate investor, you may have a property that's underperforming or just getting old and has a lot of deferred maintenance that you don't want to do. But you've kept it in your portfolio because you don't want to pay capital gains tax when you sell it. In today's episode, we'll look at how to defer capital gains through utilizing a tool called a 1031 exchange. I'm Kathy Fettke, and welcome to the Real Wealth Show.
You're listening to The Real Wealth Show with Kathy Fettke, the real estate investor's resource.
Today, we have Stephanie, a 1031 exchange expert, who's going to guide us through what a 1031 exchange is, how it works, and what a reverse exchange is. And if you like this episode, make sure to visit realwealth.com/webinars. Stephanie will be featured on an upcoming webinar where she'll go even deeper on the 1031 exchange. It's free to join that webinar. So again, just sign up at realwealth.com/webinars. Stephanie, welcome to the Real Wealth Show.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on today.
Well, I'm so glad you're here because I got started in real estate investing through a 1031 exchange. So let's just start with what that is.
So a 1031 exchange, it's a tax deferral strategy that investors can take advantage of to really, you get to defer your taxes so that you can increase your real estate portfolio, increase your cash flow. The whole reason we get into investing is obviously for cash flow purposes. So your client has a investment property, and they're have quite a bit of appreciation on it because they've owned it for a certain amount of time. The best thing they can do is sell that property, use all of that appreciation. Say they bought it for $300,000 and now it's worth $600,000. Why would you not sell it and purchase two properties, expand your real estate portfolio, and increase your cash flow? So 1031 exchange is a tax code, and it's kind of a nice gift from the IRS to allow people to defer those taxes instead of having to pay capital gains.
So it is an example of that $300,000 property that's now worth $600,000. If you sold it, the IRS would look at it like that's a $300,000 gain. You paid $300,000, now it's worth $600,000. You would pay, depending on your tax bracket, up to 20%, 24%, is it?
So the capital gains taxes, there's actually like 4 levels of it. So first off, there's a 25% depreciation recapture. So whatever you've depreciated over the years while you've owned the property, the IRS will take 25% of that. The remaining amount is a 15 to 20% federal tax. Then whatever state tax you might have. So I'm in California, 14.4%. And then there's an additional tax of 3.8%, and that's called the net investment income tax. So there are 4 layers of taxes that your client might have to pay if they were doing a regular sale. But if they do a 1031 exchange, they can redeploy all of those funds into a purchase of a new property. So as an example, for like a California property, say they purchased it at $400,000, and then they're going to sell it years later for $1 million. So depreciation, it's fully depreciated. That's going to be $300,000. So their new tax basis would be $100,000. So they're going to have $900,000 worth of capital gains that they would be taxed on. In California, it's going to be around 33 to 37%. So they might only walk away with like $650,000 if they did a straight sale.
Yeah.
But if they do the 1031 exchange, they'll have the full $1 million minus closing costs and commissions to redeploy into more investment properties.
Yeah, as long as the IRS, I guess, looks at it like it's still an investment property. So we're just going to kind of treat it like it's the same property. It's just that you're exchanging it for this property for this property. So it has to be like kind. Can you describe what like kind means in the eyes of the IRS?
Of course, like kind means any real property held for productive use in a trade, business, or for investment purposes. So you can go from raw land to industrial, to single family, to apartment, retail, net lease. All of those qualify for a 1031 exchange, and you can go from one property to another, and you can also go from one geographical location to another. So the 1031 exchange can be exchanged anywhere in the United States. So you can go from California to Alabama or Texas, Florida. All the states are available for the 1031 exchange. And as long as it's real property held for productive use in a trade, business, or for investment purposes, it will qualify for a 1031.
So it's pretty broad what you can, buy once you sell a property. This is so important to understand before you sell a property, right? You've got to know your exit plan, your next steps before you even begin marketing. And why is that?
When you're doing your 1031 exchange, although it's a really nice gift from the IRS to allow you to defer your taxes, there are specific time limits that are associated with the 1031 exchange. And you really do need to make sure that you're compliant with the times and the type of purchase and the type of investment you had. So when you go to do a 1031 exchange, you've got a time clock that starts, and that time clock starts at close of escrow of your sale. So when you close escrow on your sale of your property, you have a 45-day identification period and 180 days to close on that replacement property. The 45 days is at the beginning of the 180 days. So you'll have 45 days plus an additional 135 days to close on your replacement property. I suggest people start looking for their replacement property the minute they go under contract on their sale. So what happens with that is they'll go under contract, they'll get with their realtor or the RealWealth network and start really finding that replacement property, because whatever you have on your list by midnight of the 45th day, those are the only properties you can close on. So it's really important to make sure that whatever you're going to close on is a viable option. And you should start looking at properties as soon as possible and figuring out what the best next step is for you. Maybe you've had a bunch of residential properties and you're like, it's too much. Go buy a retail net lease. That's a good option because there's less management to that. Or purchase an apartment building and hire a management company. Or vice versa. Maybe you've got a large property and you've got 3 kids and you want to make sure that they each have something of their own. So go out and buy 3 rental properties, manage them, and then pass those on. There's so many different reasons why people would want to go from different asset class or different geographical location when they're considering doing a 1031 exchange. So it's really great that you guys are there and you look at all the properties and get things vetted for people.
Yeah, it's a stressful process because like you said, you have 45 days to identify your replacement property. And if you miss that, you're going to be paying taxes. The government doesn't give you any leeway on that. So because of the stress of this, RealWealth has really served a lot of people in that process of where am I going to find enough property? Because a lot of our investors at RealWealth are from California. One woman in particular comes to mind who was at a recent event, and she's selling a property that's now worth $4 million. And for her to go find $4 million worth of property in 45 days, far too stressful. But we're able to help her because we have relationships all over the country with people who have properties ready to go, and we can help with that. And have so many times. We had one woman who inherited a property in downtown San Francisco that was just in total disrepair, couldn't be rented. This is one reason why someone might do it. It was like going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars to bring this property into, any kind of condition to rent. And she didn't have that money. So we said, well, just sell it and let's get you into something that you don't have to worry so much about and you don't have to put money into. She was able to sell it for $1.5 million. We got her into 20 properties, all located in different markets. She went from zero, actually negative, because it was costing money to hold this, the property taxes and insurance and stuff, from negative to over $20,000 a month.
That's amazing. I mean, and that's what the 1031 is for. And you guys are amazing at that because there is a lot of stress having to find that replacement property. It can be really tough. And if you don't have the right one and you don't close on it, then yes, you end up paying those capital gains taxes.
You're out of luck.
Giving all that money that you could have used to, increase your portfolio away.
Yeah. Yeah. So what with the mistakes that we've seen investors make is they maybe make their replacement property property that's not built yet. And they think, well, I have 6 months to close. It'll close, it'll be done by then. Well, it may not be done by then. And again, like you got to identify in 45 days, but you got to close in 180
Yeah.
from the day that you sell the original property. So don't get into new construction that's not close to being done yet. If
Oh,
it's like,
absolutely.
yeah, right. If it's just a matter of, oh, they just need to do the touch up work or whatever, put the floors in. But if it's raw land, please no, don't do that. It's not going to be done in 6 months.
No, that can be scary.
Another thing is they identify properties, but they didn't do the full due diligence and decide this isn't really a good investment. But because they identified it, they close on it anyway just to do the exchange. Have you seen that happen?
Yeah, that has happened. And the unfortunate thing with that is once you've closed on the property, you've got it and you're kind of stuck with it for a certain amount of time. So technically there's no holding period for a 1031 exchange, but the IRS put out a private letter ruling indicating that if you hold it for 24 months, that pretty much satisfies their requirement. Because the thing with a 1031 exchange is what is your intent when you purchase the property? Your intent needs to be property held for long-term investment purposes. So 24 months is allowable through a private letter ruling from the IRS. So that's your safest time.
Mm-hmm.
Technically, there's not an actual holding period. I had a client who purchased a property for $350,000 and it was raw land and he was going to build on it. So he was getting ready to build a bunch of little bungalows. He was talking to realtors. He was getting zoning. He was talking to construction. So he had a full paper trail of what his intent was when he purchased the property. But someone came to him 8 months later and offered him $850,000 for it. So he got with his attorney, his tax attorney and his CPA, and they decided he had enough of a paper trail where it would be allowable for him to do that. They could justify to the IRS what his initial intent was. So if someone does need to sell something earlier, you really want to make sure that you're able, if you were in the room with your CPA and an audit, that they could justify what your original intent was when you purchased the property.
That's great advice. Yeah, another thing to do if you don't want to be stuck exchanging into a property that isn't one you really want to close on. So identify several. You don't I've seen this before where it's like I've got 45 days to identify a property and they identify just one and that one doesn't work out. So you can identify several, right? And you're not required to close on all of them.
Yeah, there's different rules. So the first one is the 3-property rule, where you can identify up to 3 properties of any value. And you can close on 1, 2, or all 3 of them. That one's used the most. The next one is the 200% rule. With that one, they're going to put a cap on the amount you can identify. So you can identify more than 3 properties, as many as you want. But there's a cap on how much a fair market value of all of those properties combined you can identify. So say you needed to reinvest $500,000. The most you could identify with all the properties combined would be $1 million. So twice the amount that you need to reinvest is your cap for that. So the 200% rule comes into play there. The third rule is called the 95% rule. So if they want to identify as many as they want, and they want them to be of any value, they can do that. It's a little more risky because they have to close on 95% of whatever they identified.
Ooh, yeah, that sounds a lot riskier. Yeah.
Basically 100%. Not sure why they're saying 95, but pretty
Who
much.
knows?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard about this thing called a reverse exchange. What is that?
So a reverse exchange can be a really helpful tool, especially for people who are nervous about finding their replacement property, or if they just come across something that they just feel that they have to have, seize the opportunity. So they can purchase the property first prior to selling their property. The way it works is they're going to put an offer in on the property. The offer gets accepted. They need to call a qualified intermediary immediately. So what we do is we set up an LLC to purchase the property on their behalf. They're not able to hold both properties at the same time. So they're going to call us. We're going to set up an LLC on their behalf. The LLC is then going to be assigned to purchase contract. The LLC is going to purchase the property on their behalf with their funds. So they need to either have cash that they can pull from somewhere or find a specific type of lender that will loan them the money during the time that they have to do the exchange. So we're going to step in, purchase the property on their behalf, and hold that property for them in that LLC. We become what's referred to as an EAT. It's an exchange accommodation title holder. So we're going to hold the title on their behalf while they're selling their property. So the timeline works on that the same, but in reverse. So they're going to have 45 days to identify which one of their properties they want to sell, and then 180 days to close on that sale. So they need to make sure that their realtor has their property priced right and that it sells within that 180 days, because if not, when it's the 180 days is up, we're going to give them that property back because we don't want to hold the one that we purchased. So they'll end up with two properties if they can't sell their original one. But typically they'll sell their original one. The funds from their sale will come to the exchange accommodation title holder, and we'll give the funds back to the person who was doing the reverse exchange. So they're a little more complicated,
but could give you some comfort too.
Absolutely.
Worst case, you end up with two properties then.
Right. And then you could try and sell it again and do a regular forward exchange.
Exactly. Just do a regular one. Okay. Yeah. And no matter what you do, you have to have a qualified intermediary. So you can't just sell a property and those funds go into your personal bank account or the bank account of your LLC and then try to pull off the exchange, right?
Right. Yeah. So what we do is we send out an exchange agreement to our clients when they're doing their 1031 exchange. I suggest they do this right when they go under contract. But the main thing is it has to be done prior to close of escrow. And the reason for that is the clients are not allowed to have constructive or actual receipt of the funds. If they do, then that blows the exchange. They're not going to be able to do the exchange. So, 2 days ago, I had someone call and say, I'm closing today. Can you do this? Yes, we can. We got it done.
You can.
Within 2 hours. Yep. So as long as you haven't closed, we can still set up the exchange. We just called escrow and said, hold the recording. Do not send it off for recording. Wait, let us get the exchange agreement back signed from the client. So they sent us the preliminary title and the purchase contract and all the amendments. We put everything together, sent it to headquarters. They then sent out the exchange agreement. Client signed it, came back to us. We've got it prior to close of escrow. Wiring instructions go to escrow. Funds come to us, and we hold the funds in a non-commingled account in a large national bank on their behalf.
Oh, wow.
And when they find their replacement, we send out earnest money deposit, and then we send out the final payment when it's ready to close.
Oof, but I assume you don't recommend that.
No, I do not recommend it. I recommend right when you go under contract, give us a call so we can have everything in place for you. Because there could be some issues that we come across, like maybe title's not correct. And you can, have a little bit of time to check on that and make sure that everything's in order. Normally we're able to suss all that out pretty quickly, making an amendment to the purchase contract, because ultimately you want to know who the exchange entity is. The taxpayer entity is the one doing an exchange. So you need to make sure, is it a partnership doing the exchange? Is it an LLC doing the exchange? Who's the ultimate taxpayer that's trying to do the exchange? Because again, 1031 is a tax code that applies to the taxpayer.
Now, how does a property owner know that they're working with a legitimate 1031 company? Because at the end of the day, that's where the money's going. You want to make sure it's going to somebody legit.
Yeah, that's correct. And the truth is that we're a non-regulated industry.
Comforting.
Yeah. It's very important they're working with a qualified intermediary that's got a long reputation, and so that they can feel comfortable and secure that their funds are going to be there on the other side. Because there have been some bad actors in the past where that has not been the case. Either they've invested it and the investments have not gone well, or they've misappropriated, or they've absconded.
So don't just meet someone at a meetup and give them your money.
Yeah, they really want to vet their qualified intermediary. I've had people be like, oh, but this place is so much cheaper. It's like, they're holding your money.
Yeah. Yeah,
You want to
exactly.
make sure that it's there at the other end. What are they doing with it? Why are they so cheap? What's their reputation? Yeah, so it's really, really important to make sure that they are working with a qualified intermediary that has a good long history and track record.
Well, I love talking to people like you because you kind of get an inside look at what investors are doing. So, are you seeing any trends right now of what investors are exchanging from what and into what and where they're doing it?
It kind of depends on the investor. Lots of them kind of stay in their own lane. Like if they've been owning single family properties, lots of times they'll stay with residential. If they're more comfortable with commercial, lots of times they'll stay with commercial. Um, some older clients are sometimes going into a different vehicle called a 1030, called a DST, which is a Delaware Statutory Trust. It's a passive investment kind of opportunity where they're not going to own the property. A separate entity will own the property for them. But I get a lot of people who own residential and they're just exchanging into 2 or 3 more residentials, and they're moving into different states, different geographic locations. Some like them to be spread out all over. Some like them 20 minutes from home so they can go check on it. Yeah, I mostly see people kind of staying in the lane that they're already comfortable with.
But maybe they just want a different age of the property or a different area or
Well, also, if you're in a low growth area, your rents are not going to be increasing. Um, Also, different states have different kind of rules for their landlords, and some states are a lot more friendly than other states. So lots of times if people are in a state where the landlord rules are not very friendly towards the landlords, they'll end up moving to other states. Also, owning one asset in a, California kind of location, they can own multiple assets in other locations. That gives them a little bit more security. If somebody leaves and they need to find a new renter to go into that property, if they've got 3 properties and someone leaves, they're still getting income. But if they
yeah.
have 1 property and somebody leaves, they might not have anything for months until they find a replacement renter.
Yeah, you're 100% out. That's what, who we serve is people who have one property that's gotten very expensive, but the rents have not kept up with the value of the property. So they might be kind of getting the same rents that they were getting when the property was $300,000 and now it's $1 million. They could take that money, go buy, 4 or 5 properties somewhere else in a more landlord friendly area, way, way, way dramatically increase their cash flow and have that diversification. Like you said, now it's like having a multifamily property, but diversified. So like you said, if one tenant, if one unit goes vacant, they have the others to be able to pay the mortgage if there is one. And so that's one last thing. When you're selling a property and doing a 1031 exchange and you have a loan on that property that you're selling, what are the rules around that?
One of the rules, well, basically, if they want to do full tax deferral, they need to reinvest all the net proceeds and they need to replace any debt with new debt or with cash. So say they sold the property for $500,000. We'll say, 30,000 of that was closing costs and commissions. So they have $470,000 left over. 100 of that is debt. They need to replace that debt with new debt or pull cash from somewhere else. That full 470 needs to be reinvested for full tax deferral. Any amount that they don't reinvest of the net proceeds or the debt will be subject to capital gains taxes, and that's referred to as boot. So any boot that's left over is subject to capital gains. It's either cash boot or mortgage boot.
So they're not required to get another loan. Like, so there's $100,000 loan on the property. They get another property. They are not required to get another loan. They can just bring in cash.
Yeah, absolutely. They can. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Okay, Stephanie. Well, we are excited. We've got a webinar coming up where people can ask questions and learn more about how to do a 1031 exchange. You can just go to realwealth.com/webinars to sign up for that. I know, again, our investors are very excited because there is so much opportunity to sell in a high price market and exchange into a lower priced, more high cash flow market. So you leave a low cash flow market for a high cash flow one, but you can also get appreciation in those new markets, especially if they are in growth areas. So wonderful opportunities. Again, you can find out more and sign up for that webinar at realwealth.com/webinars.
Thank you so much for having me today. I appreciate it. And I look forward to the presentation next week. It'll be a full PowerPoint. And so it'll have all the details and all the nuances of the different types of exchanges and kind of how they come into play for the whole process.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Stephanie. Look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for joining me here on the Real Wealth Show. Again, you can go to realwealth.com/webinars to sign up for Stephanie's webinar and get a lot more information and detail on how to do it. I'm Kathy Fettke. Thanks for joining me here on the Real Wealth Show, and we'll see you next time.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and should not be construed as an offer to buy or sell any securities or to make or consider any investment or course of action. For more information, go to realwealthshow.com.